something wrong.
Some call it the greatest year in music history. And they are not wrong. But they are not telling the whole story either. Because underneath the hits, underneath the charts, underneath everything the radio played on repeat that year, there were ballads, deep ones, slow ones. Songs that carried the full weight of what Black America was living through in 1967. Songs built from real pain, real love, real survival. And here is what most people get completely wrong about that year. The ballads that truly defined 1967 were not always the ones that got the glory. Some of them were buried. Some of them were borrowed without credit. And some of them were so honest, the industry did not know what to do with them. Today we count down 10 R&B ballads that defined 1967. By the time we reach number 1, you will hear that year differently than you ever have before. Number 10, James Carr, The Dark End of the Street. Let me tell you where this song lives. Not on a stage, not on a radio. It lives in the part of you that has ever loved someone you were not supposed to love. The part that knows what it feels like to want something that the world around you has decided is wrong. The Dark End of the Street is one of those recordings that does not feel like a performance. It feels like a confession. Like you accidentally walked into a room where someone was telling the truth and now you cannot unknow what you heard. Released on Goldwax Records, a small Memphis independent label that produced some of the most emotionally devastating soul recordings of the entire decade. The production is spare and deliberate. Piano, a gentle rhythm section, strings that arrive like a slowly tightening feeling in your chest, and James Carr's voice carrying everything else. The lyrics are about a secret love, two people meeting in the shadows because they cannot meet in the light. They have lives that do not have room for what they feel for each other, but the feeling exists anyway, persistent, undeniable, and the song does not judge them for it. It just holds the ache of their situation with extraordinary tenderness. The record reached the R&B Top 10 and became one of the defining Southern soul recordings of its era. It has been covered by artists across multiple genres, from Graham Parsons to Percy Sledge to Clarence Carter, because the emotional truth at its center belongs to no single genre or generation. People who heard him perform live, people who had seen Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett and the very best of that era, would say that James Carr had something none of them had. Something in the quality of his voice when he was fully present in a song that was simply beyond technique. It was transmission, pure emotional transmission. Why is his name not in every single R&B conversation today? Partly because Goldwax Records, despite its extraordinary output, was a small independent without the distribution power to build and sustain a national artist profile. The voice was there. The talent was there. The circumstances around them were not always able to hold them up. He gave this song everything he had, and everything he had was extraordinary. The next entry is from an artist who understood longing in a different way. Not the longing of forbidden love, but the longing of a love that was right there, within reach, and somehow still distant. Number 9. William Bell, Never Like This Before. There is a specific kind of R&B ballad that does not hit you all at once. It approaches slowly. It sits down next to you. It starts talking in a quiet voice. And by the time you realize how deep you are in the feeling, you are already completely inside it with no way back out. Never Like This Before is that kind of record. William Bell was one of the founding artists of the Stax Records roster in Memphis, one of the architects of the sound that defined Southern soul in the 1960s. He wrote, "You Don't Miss Your Water" before he was 20 years old. He understood the geography of loss and longing in a way that most songwriters spend entire careers trying to find. This record was released on Stax in 1967 and produced with the warm, unhurried confidence that defined the best Stax recordings of that era. The house band, Booker T, and the MGs alongside the Memphis Horns created a bed for William Bell's voice that felt like coming home. Not an exciting home, a real one. The kind where you can take your shoes off and be exactly who you are. The lyrics are about the experience of loving someone in a way that has no precedent in your own emotional history. Never like this before. The specific bewilderment of finding yourself feeling something new at a point in your life when you thought you already knew what feeling felt like, that is not a young person's theme. That is the theme of someone who has lived enough to know the difference between feeling something and feeling something genuinely new. The record found its audience within the Stax community and the broader Southern soul world. It was the kind of album track and regional hit that built an artist's reputation through word of mouth and jukebox play rather than national chart dominance. Here is your fun fact. William Bell actually left Stax Records for military service not long after establishing himself as one of its key early artists. By the time he returned, the label had evolved significantly. New artists had come in, the sound had developed, and rebuilding his position in that changed landscape required patience and persistence that many artists in his position would not have sustained. He sustained it. That persistence is part of why his catalog from this era holds together as a body of work. Why does Never Like This Before sometimes get bypassed even in serious Stax conversations? Because the Stax catalog is vast and the competition for attention within it is fierce. When your label mates include Otis Redding and Sam and Dave and Carla Thomas, even genuinely beautiful work has to fight for its place in the retrospective narrative. But this record earned its place. It just needs someone to point directly at it and say, listen, really listen. Listen, if this countdown is already reaching you, smash that like button right now. It keeps this music history alive for the people who need to find it. The next record on this list is one that should have been the biggest R&B hit of 1967, but ran into forces outside the music that changed everything about where it was allowed to go.
If this song just hit you in that quiet place, don't let this moment be a one-time thing. Subscribe to Demo. We're building a home for real R&B and soul, the kind that heals, the kind that tells the truth. Hit subscribe and come back whenever you need a song that understands you.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 8, Clarence Carter, Slip Away.
What would I give?
Close your eyes for a second. You are somewhere quiet, late evening. The kind of quiet where you can hear yourself think.
For just a few moments.
And you are thinking about someone. Someone you love in a way that is complicated. In a way that cannot be fully explained to anyone who is not inside the feeling with you. And then this voice comes on.
What would I give? Just to have
Deep, unhurried, completely certain of itself. And it says exactly what you have been thinking but could not find the words for.
you near.
That is what Clarence Carter does on Slip Away. He finds the words for things that do not have easy words.
Tell me you would try to slip away somehow.
And he delivers them with such calm authority that you feel for the duration of the record, that the complicated thing you are carrying is understood, that somewhere, someone felt this too, and put it on a record so you would not have to carry it alone. Slip Away was recorded at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, the same sacred ground where so much of the greatest Southern soul of the 1960s was created. It was produced by Rick Hall, the founder of Fame, and one of the most important figures in the history of recorded soul music, and released on Atlantic Records in 1968, though it was recorded in the 1967 sessions that defined that era of Fame output. Atlantic Records in this period was home to Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, Ray Charles, the absolute peak of American soul music. Being on that label meant being an extraordinary company. It also meant competing for attention and promotional resources with some of the most celebrated artists in the world.
Slip away, slip away.
The lyrics are about wanting to steal time with someone you love, to slip away from the complications of life and just be together, privately, without the weight of the outside world pressing down.
Oh, I need you so.
There is no anger in the song, no drama, just a man who loves someone and wants to be close to them, simply and completely, without everything else interfering. The record reached the top 20 on the R&B charts and introduced Clarence Carter to a national audience. His voice distinctive, warm, with that slight roughness that signals lived experience, was immediately recognizable and immediately trusted.
How sweet it is.
Fun fact, Clarence Carter was blind from childhood, having lost his sight to an illness at an early age. He has spoken in interviews about how his blindness shaped the way he experienced and processed music, how the auditory world became his primary landscape in ways that sighted musicians may not fully access.
When you staring down at
That depth of listening, that orientation towards sound as the primary way of knowing the world, is arguably audible in how he approaches a vocal. He does not just sing the melody, he inhabits it. Why does this song sometimes get overshadowed in 1967 and 1968 R&B conversation?
take this stuff. How sweet it is.
Partly because his later work, particularly Patches, achieved bigger commercial success and drew most of the retrospective attention. And partly because Atlantic's promotional focus in this period was necessarily concentrated on its biggest acts. Leaving artists like Clarence Carter to build their audience through regional radio and word of mouth rather than national push. He slipped into your heart quietly. That was always his gift. Number 7. Barbara Mason. Oh, How It Hurts. I want to talk to you about pain for a moment. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of pain that makes for a good story. The quiet kind. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that sits in your chest on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when you are going about your life, and suddenly, without warning, you feel the full weight of something you have been carrying and you just stop. Barbara Mason understood that pain, and she put it into music with a precision that still cuts today. Oh, How It Hurts was released in 1968 on Arctic Records, a Philadelphia-based independent label that was already developing the sensibility that would eventually become the Philadelphia soul sound of the 1970s. Barbara Mason had already had significant success with Yes, I'm Ready in 1965, which had reached the top 5 on the R&B charts and crossed into the pop top 10. By 1967 and into 1968, she was established as one of the most emotionally honest voices in Philadelphia R&B.
Yes, it will. After a while, I know.
The production on this record has that warm, slightly melancholic Philadelphia quality orchestration that feels tender rather than lush, a rhythm section that moves carefully rather than powerfully, creating space for Barbara Mason's voice to do the work it needed to do.
You found somebody.
The lyrics describe the specific aftermath of a relationship ending, not the dramatic moment of the ending itself that has its own kind of adrenaline that can carry you through. This is the days after.
Knew. Yes, you have. You think you found.
The weeks after, when the adrenaline has gone and what is left is just the persistent, undramatic reality of the absence of reaching for something that is not there anymore.
Your dream come true. That's all.
Of the ordinary moments that used to be shared and are now just ordinary, that is the specific territory Barbara Mason inhabits on this record, and she inhabits it completely.
Alright, because I'd rather leave you safe.
Here is your fun fact. Barbara Mason was in her late teens when Yes, I'm Ready became a hit. The emotional weight she brought to songs about adult love and loss at that age was something that struck everyone who worked with her. Producers who were considerably older described being surprised by the depth of feeling she could access. Where it came from, whether from personal experience or from an innate emotional intelligence that simply exceeded her years, is something only she knows. But it is there in every note.
Yes, it will. After a while.
Why does this specific record sometimes disappear even in Barbara Mason conversations? Because Yes, I'm Ready is the song that gets referenced when her name comes up.
Can't take it.
A defining debut hit can sometimes function as a wall that blocks everything that came after it. People hear the name, they think of the hit, they do not always look beyond.
We can make it. No need.
But what came after the hit was real, and it deserved more than the hit's shadow allowed it to receive. We are deep into this countdown now. Which of these ballads has reached you hardest so far? Drop it in the comments right now. I want to know. Number 6. Sam and Dave. When Something Is Wrong with My Baby.
When something is wrong.
And here is where I need to slow everything down. Because I told you at the beginning of this video that one of these entries had a story underneath it.
With my baby.
A story about what can happen when a piece of music becomes culturally significant and the people who built it find themselves in conflict over what it was worth and who it belonged to. This is that entry.
Thank you.
Sam and Dave, Sam Moore and Dave Prater were one of the greatest live acts in the history of soul music. Full stop. No qualification needed. People who saw them perform have described it as one of the most powerful experiences of their lives.
Something wrong.
The call and response between their voices, the physical energy, the absolute commitment to every moment of every performance. They were, at their peak, something genuinely rare.
With me.
When Something Is Wrong with My Baby was released on Stax Records in 1967, written by Isaac Hayes and David Porter, the songwriting and production team that created some of the most important soul recordings of the entire decade, including virtually the entire Sam and Dave catalog. The record reached number 2 on the R&B charts. It is a ballad, slower, more vulnerable than the up-tempo material they were better known for, and it showed a dimension of their artistry that their high-energy performances sometimes obscured.
And if I know.
The song is about the specific experience of emotional attunement in a relationship. When the person you love is hurting, you feel it. When something is wrong with them, something is wrong with you.
I know that.
That is not codependency, it is the deepest possible form of connection, and Sam and Dave delivered it with a tenderness that was completely convincing.
She worried.
Now, here is where the story gets complicated. And I want to be clear, what I am about to tell you has been discussed in music journalism, in documented interviews, and in the public record over many years. This is not gossip. This is history. Sam Moore and Dave Prater's personal and professional relationship was, by multiple accounts, deeply troubled throughout much of their career together. There are different versions of the story depending on who you ask, and both men gave interviews over the years that describe the same events from very different perspectives. Some people say the tensions between them were present almost from the beginning and were managed rather than resolved for as long as the commercial partnership was profitable.
The same misery.
In interviews, it's been said that financial disagreements, personal conflicts, and different visions for their careers created fractures that the music was somehow holding together even as everything around the music was falling apart. The industry politics here are significant. The arrangement between Sam and Dave and Stax Records and later Atlantic Records was structured in ways that, by Sam Moore's own account in various interviews, did not always serve the artist's long-term financial interests. The question of who owned what, who received what, and who had what level of creative and commercial control was never fully resolved to both parties' satisfaction during the peak years of their success. What did this do to their legacy? In one sense, nothing, because the music stands completely on its own. When Something Is Wrong with My Baby and Soul Man and Hold On I'm Coming are not diminished by the complicated human reality behind them. But the story of Sam and Dave, the full story, including the financial arrangements that affected their lives after the hits stopped coming, is a story that the mainstream celebration of their music frequently leaves out. The industry took from them, as it took from so many black artists of that era, in ways that were legal and deeply unfair simultaneously. And the warmth and the tenderness that you hear in When Something Is Wrong with My Baby, that genuine feeling existed alongside a professional relationship that was carrying enormous unspoken weight.
But we still got one.
Great art can come from broken places. That does not make the brokenness acceptable. That does not mean the people who profited from the arrangement while the artists carried the weight should escape the accounting. That is why this is not just music. That is history. And Sam and Dave deserved so much better from the industry that built its reputation on their voices. Number 5. Jerry Butler, Mr. Dream Merchant.
Hey, Mr. Dreamer.
Jerry Butler's nickname was the Iceman. Not because he was cold, because his cool was so deep, so completely integrated into everything he did musically that it felt elemental rather than performed.
Everything depends on you.
Like he had been born at exactly the right temperature for making people feel things without ever raising his voice.
Oh, hey, Mr. Dream.
Mr. Dream Merchant is the sound of that cool applied to the specific emotion of disillusionment, of realizing that the person you trusted with your heart was selling you something that was never going to be delivered.
Bring her back to me.
The song was released in 1967 on Mercury Records and produced in Chicago, the city that shaped Jerry Butler's musical sensibility from the beginning. first as a founding member of the Impressions, and then as a solo artist who is building one of the most quietly distinguished careers in soul music.
And make my dream come true.
The lyrics describe someone who makes beautiful promises, who paints pictures of a future that never materializes, who keeps your hope alive with words while delivering nothing of substance. Jerry Butler sings this not with anger, not with the heat that a lesser vocalist might bring to betrayal, but with a kind of sorrowful understanding. Like a man who has seen clearly what was happening and is now acknowledging it with as much grace as the situation will allow.
Said goodbye to my love.
That emotional register, clear-eyed, composed, deeply feeling without losing control, is something that Jerry Butler could access that very few vocalists have ever managed. It requires extraordinary internal discipline.
I didn't mean to make her cry.
The ability to feel fully while appearing to feel quietly. That gap between what the voice shows and what the voice holds is where all the power lives.
I didn't realize that I loved.
The record reached the R&B Top 20 and added another layer to a catalog that was building a reputation for emotional intelligence and vocal sophistication that would fully flower in his late 1960s and early 1940s. 70s work with producer Kenny Gamble.
Now I need her by my side.
Fun fact, Jerry Butler and Kenny Gamble's later collaboration at Philadelphia International Records became one of the most artistically and commercially successful partnerships in soul history. But the groundwork for what that partnership could achieve was laid in records like Mr. Dream Merchant, in the development of a vocal and emotional approach that was already fully formed and waiting for the right production context to show the world its full dimensions. Why does this specific record sometimes get skipped in serious Jerry Butler conversations? Because his later Philadelphia soul recordings, Never Give You Up, Hey Western Union Man, Only the Strong Survive, are so celebrated that they pull all the attention toward that era. The Mercury period gets treated as prelude rather than as substantial work in its own right. It was not prelude, it was the real thing, already. Number 4. Aretha Conley, Sweet Soul Music.
Do you like good music? That's sweet soul music.
Now we shift gears, just slightly. Because not every great R&B ballad of 1967 was slow and sorrowful and sitting in the dark. Some of them celebrated, some of them looked at the moment they were living in and said, this is something. This music is something. The people making it are something, and I want to say that out loud.
Just long as it's swinging. Oh yeah.
Sweet soul music is that kind of record. It is a celebration, an inventory of the greatest soul artists of the era. A song that says, look at what we have built. Listen to what we have created. This is ours, and it is extraordinary.
Oh yeah. We out here on the floor.
Aretha Conley was discovered and mentored by Otis Redding, and that relationship is one of the most touching in 1960s soul history.
Going to a go-go. And we're dancing to the music.
Otis heard something in Aretha Conley that he believed in deeply enough to produce his records, co-write his material, and put his own considerable credibility behind a young artist who needed someone to open the door.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight on you, raw.
Sweet Soul Music was released on Atco Records in 1967, distributed through Atlantic, and reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 2 on the main pop chart. In 1967,
I don't need no cause, y'all. Singing love to her.
for a soul record that was essentially a love letter to Black American music and the artists creating it. That crossover performance was a genuine cultural moment.
Thing, man. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight.
The song was built on the foundation of Sam Cooke's Yeah Man remodeled, energized, given new lyrics that named specific artists and celebrated them by name. The production crackled with the same energy that the best Fame Studios recordings of that era carried, tight, warm, alive in the room.
I don't stand a day. I don't they look great now.
Here is the fun fact that carries the most weight. Otis Redding died in December 1967, the same year Sweet Soul Music was making Arthur Conley a star.
Take it home on, I'm calling. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
The person who had believed in him most, who had invested in his talent, who was the closest thing he had to a musical guardian, was gone within months of the record's success.
Spotlight on Mr. Pickett. That wicked pig.
Arthur Conley has spoken in interviews about the profound effect of that loss, about carrying the weight of Otis's belief in him forward into a world where Otis was no longer present to see what it produced.
Singing Mustang Sally. Oh yeah.
That is a specific kind of grief. The grief of success arriving exactly when the person who made it possible cannot witness it. Why did Arthur Conley's career not sustain at the level Sweet Soul Music suggested? Partly because losing Otis Redding as a mentor and producer removed a crucial creative and industry relationship.
Oh yeah. Spotlight on Otis Redding now. Singing back.
Partly because the soul landscape was changing rapidly in the late 1960s in ways that required different musical adaptations than his strengths naturally pointed toward. But in 1967, he stood at that microphone and said, "This music is everything." And he was right. He was completely right. Number 3. Clarence Reid, Masterpiece.
Baby, you got a masterpiece. Yeah.
The word masterpiece is used too easily, too casually, applied to things that are good or even excellent when it should be reserved for things that are genuinely irreplaceable.
Your love is a masterpiece, masterpiece, masterpiece.
This song earns the word it was given as a title. Clarence Reid was a Miami-based singer, songwriter, and producer who worked across multiple identities during his career. He is perhaps better known under a different name in a different musical context, but in 1967 and the years surrounding it,
And it means the world to me.
he was making soul recordings of genuine depth and distinction that the broader music world did not always find.
Your love is a masterpiece.
Masterpiece is a love song, but it is a love song built on a specific and uncommon premise. The idea that the person you love is a work of art, not metaphorically, literally.
And I love it now. It's so dope.
That they have been created with the same care and intention that goes into making something beautiful and lasting. And that loving them is therefore an act of appreciating something that took everything it had to become what it is.
Down good. Have to bitch myself. Just to
That framing love as recognition of artistry, the beloved as creation gives the lyric a tenderness that is almost reverent. And Clarence Reid sings it with exactly that reverence. Quietly, completely.
see if I'm dreaming. And when I think
The production comes from the Miami soul world that was developing its own distinctive sound in the late 1960s, slightly looser than the tight Muscle Shoals or Memphis productions, with a warmth that felt almost tropical compared to the urban soul coming out of Chicago and New York.
about how sweet it is, how the color line.
Fun fact, Clarence Reid's work as a songwriter extended far beyond his own recordings. He wrote for other artists throughout the 1960s and 1970s,
To keep from screaming. So please.
contributing to a body of work that influenced the development of soul and its successor genres in ways that are difficult to fully trace because they happened below the level of public attribution.
Please, baby, don't you worry. No, no.
The songs he gave other people became part of the architecture of R&B in ways that his own name was not always attached to.
Honey, don't you regret. 'Cause your love.
Why does this record live in relative obscurity? Because Miami soul has never received the same historical attention as the Memphis, Detroit, or Philadelphia scenes.
Satisfies me completely. And I never.
The geographical bias of music criticism, the tendency to center the better documented cities and labels, has left a significant body of genuinely important music from the Miami scene underexplored and undervalued.
Do anything that you regret. Even
That is the music industry's loss, and ours for not knowing sooner. Number 2, Garnet Mimms. Stop and think it over.
so many times I've been in love. I thought.
We are almost at the top of this list, and I want to take a moment here before we get to number 1 to talk about what it means to be truly present in a song.
That love was here to stay this time, but now you're gone. I'm
Not technically present, not professionally present, truly present. In the way where you can hear, in every breath and every pause and every note, that the person singing is not performing an emotion but experiencing it in real time and letting you experience it with them. Garnet Mimms had that quality.
smiling through tears, trying to carry on, but the hurt.
It is one of the rarest things in music, and Stop and Think It Over is one of the clearest demonstrations of it in the entire 1967 R&B catalog.
Since we've been apart, been a terrible feel.
Garnet Mimms had come out of the gospel tradition, and it shows, not in an obvious, surface-level way, but in the way he breathes inside a phrase. In the way he holds a note not just until the melody asks him to move, but until the emotion asks him to move.
Deep in my heart, won't leave because you're gone, just like a flower.
In the way he communicates, through pure vocal presence, that what he is singing is not a performance of feeling, but feeling itself.
Growing in the spring, that's how my love.
Stop and Think It Over was recorded in the mid to late 1960s and found its audience in 1967 through radio and jukebox play in the R&B community.
For you, and it's a hurting thing, why don't you stop?
The production is elegant, unhurried, spacious, built to let the voice do what it needs to do without crowding it. The arrangement provides warmth and depth without taking up the space that belongs to Garnet Mimms.
Think it over, hear my plea, come on.
The lyrics are exactly what the title promises, a plea for someone to slow down, to pause before making a decision that cannot be undone.
Back to me, baby, won't you stop? Think it.
To think carefully about what they are walking away from before they walk away from it. There is love in the request, real love. The kind that does not demand or threaten, it just asks, quietly and seriously, for the consideration that love deserves.
Over, hear my plea, girl, come on back to me.
Fun fact, Garnet Mimms is perhaps best known in mainstream music history for Cry Baby from 1963, which became one of the defining early soul recordings of that decade, and later inspired Janis Joplin's well-known version.
What did I do to make you leave me? Tell me, baby.
But the depth of his catalog, the work that came after the initial breakthrough, including recordings from 1967 and beyond, is where his full artistry is most completely on display. People who know only Cry Baby know a fraction of what Garnet Mimms was.
Baby, tell me, baby. Just got to know why you deceive me. Tell me now, baby.
Why is Stop and Think It Over not in constant rotation in 1967 R&B conversations? Because his earlier hit created an expectation for a certain kind of high-energy emotional delivery.
Tell me, baby. All these years I stood by your side, didn't I, baby? Didn't I, baby?
And records that showed a different, quieter dimension of his artistry did not always get the same critical recognition. The music industry and music journalism sometimes prefers the version of an artist it already understands.
You made me love you and then you left me now, didn't you, baby?
Stop, listen, think it over. The next entry does not need much introduction, but it needs the right one. because it is one of the most significant recordings in the history of American soul, and it deserves to be heard as exactly that.
If this song just hit you in that quiet place, don't let this moment be a one-time thing. Subscribe to Demo. We're building a home for real R&B and soul, the kind that heals, the kind that tells the truth. Hit subscribe and come back whenever you need a song that understands you.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 1. Aretha Franklin. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You.
You're no good, heartbreaker.
And I want to be direct with you about why this is here at the top. Not just because of the quality of the recording, although the quality is beyond argument. Not just because of the cultural significance, although the cultural significance is enormous.
You're lying and you're cheating.
It is number 1 on this list because of what it represented at the exact moment it appeared, because of what it said about where R&B was going.
I don't know why I let you do these things.
Because of the door it kicked open for an entire generation of artists who came after it. And because of the specific, extraordinary human being who stood at that microphone and made it.
My friends keep telling me.
Aretha Franklin. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You. January 1967. A recording session at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Aretha Franklin had been signed to Columbia Records for 6 years.
They say, Reid, the man ain't no good.
6 years of recordings that were technically accomplished and commercially modest. 6 years of a label trying to figure out what to do with a voice that was beyond anything their existing frameworks could contain.
Oh, they don't know.
6 years of Aretha Franklin being managed toward a sound that was not her sound. And then she went to Muscle Shoals. And she went to Atlantic Records. And she sat down at the piano and she opened her mouth. And everything changed. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You was produced by Jerry Wexler at Fame Studios with the Fame Rhythm Section, one of the tightest and most soulful groups of musicians assembled in that era. The recording had an energy in the room that everyone present has described as something beyond normal. Something that exceeded what recording sessions usually produced. Something that felt, in the moment, like a historical event, even to the people who were too close to it to have the distance that historical perspective requires. The song is about loving someone in a way that is beyond your own comprehension, beyond what you thought you were capable of. The specific experience of feeling something larger than yourself for another person and feeling it with such intensity that it is almost frightening. Not because of anything wrong with the love, because of how completely it has taken you over. Aretha Franklin does not sing this song. She inhabits it. She brings to it everything that 6 years of musical frustration had been building toward. She brings the gospel foundation that was the deepest root of her voice. She brings the jazz intelligence that Columbia had tried to center and that belonged, it turned out, in service of the soul rather than as the point of the music. She brings the lived experience of a woman who knew what she was singing about. The record went to number 1 on the R&B charts and into the top 10 on the pop chart. The album that followed, recorded in the same period, became one of the most celebrated records in the history of American music. And Aretha Franklin became, in a way she had not been before January 1967, Exactly what she was supposed to be. The Queen of Soul. Not as a title, as a fact.
But I was so wrong, yeah.
Here is your fun fact. The Muscle Shoals session that produced this record was not without its complications. There were tensions during the recording that required the session to be paused and continued later in New York.
He's got one fool, he ain't gonna lose.
The full story of what happened in Muscle Shoals in January 1967 has been told in various ways by various people who were there.
The way he treats me is a shame. How could he?
What is not disputed is that what emerged from those sessions, despite or perhaps because of the tension and the emotion and the complicated human dynamics, was something that the music world was not ready for and could not stop talking about from the moment it heard it.
You were so bad. When baby, you know that.
Sometimes the best things come from the hardest moments. Sometimes what feels like difficulty in the room is actually pressure, the kind that turns things into diamonds.
And the sweet thing that you ever had.
Why does this song sometimes get taken for granted in R&B history conversations? Because Aretha Franklin's subsequent catalog, Respect, Chain of Fools, Natural Woman, is so celebrated and so enormous that even a record this significant can get treated as part of a body of greatness rather than as the moment that body of greatness began.
So kiss me once again.
But this was the beginning. This was the first morning of something that changed everything.
Don't you never play with you, but I ain't.
And every time it plays, every time that piano intro starts and that voice arrives, it is January 1967 again. Aretha Franklin is at the microphone, and everything is about to change.